Hello and welcome to another Take from Caesar tutorial. My name is David Merlin. Nothing you'll hear me say is intended as legal advice. Anything sounds like that to you, just consider it something somebody else might do on a planet far, far away where the law matters. It doesn't matter here. I prove it on a daily basis, believe it. So, the Paul Manafort indictment, all abuzz throughout the news. It's Thursday now. It came out on Monday. And as in it's October 2nd. Or November 2nd, excuse me. And it's one thing to hear that, and it's altogether another thing to be led slowly through what an indictment really is without a whole bunch of law library lessons in common law and the history of Congress and the enactment of criminal a whole lot of things that you can get into that the average individual simply doesn't need to know. What you need to know, I feel. And again, my disclaimer, none of this is legal advice. What you need to know to understand what's been done by the Department of Justice in the instance of the bringing of an indictment against Paul Manafort. I'm just going to touch on the high points. And you see over here a list of statutes. These are the ones involved in the indictment for whatever reason. Mode of recovery. Okay? That's just to recover assets because they've alleged a conspiracy to defraud the United States up here. Defraud him out of what? Out of the taxes he didn't pay. Oh, no. If he did not owe taxes, and I want you to carry this question throughout this tutorial. Yeah, this is a 64-page PDF document. We're not going to be here forever, but I'm not going to run through this. How many people out there even offer a view of an indictment? Hey, class, let's go through this indictment and evaluate it on a couple of very important fronts regarding, did the government abuse any of its authority? If so, how much? How much of this man's rights, future liberty maybe, is threatened by government abuse? Of course, that's always my focus when I approach an interaction between the government, municipal, state, or Fed, and the individual. Now, the indictment I have read through, and not for particulars. I'm not going to bore you with a whole lot of particulars that you would find if you took the time to read every word of the indictment, but we're going to get to the fabric of it regarding a couple of specific aspects. But you can look broadly at a couple of the charges, and I have to ask questions. What were you thinking when you did that? So not all of this is tax misconduct, which is, of course, is my focus. Some of it involves things like, why didn't you register as an agent for a foreign government? The law kind of requires it. Everybody's innocent till proven guilty. Innocence could be a lack of criminal intent. Go for it. You make every argument you think is valid. Well, there's only been 6 prosecutions of that in the last how many years? 40 years? I can't remember what I heard on the, I think it was Sean Hannity, that said it's only been prosecuted like 6 times in a few decades, and only 2 of those were successful. Well, that kind of lends itself to an argument, to include in an argument to the court that why would he think he's required to do so when it's so seldom even policed? ignorance of the law is no excuse, and that's the maxim against which that proposal would, against which it would find itself. Yeah, ignorance of the law is no excuse, but, it's only been prosecuted X number of times out of how many? In how many years? And so, it's like sending somebody to prison. We got this law from 1878 that says, if you do that with animals or whatever, okay, it's an argument along those lines, but it's not a law of antiquity. It's not out of date. It's simply off the radar of the DOJ. That's not an excuse, I feel. And so, great, okay, benefit of the doubt, might be a misdemeanor charge. I can't remember. I didn't go, specifically and make a bunch of notes about these statutes, but slap on the wrist with a felony would be 90 days house arrest and a felony record. So, something. Throw a bone to the Department of Justice. Now, conspiracy to commit an offense or to defraud the United States. Conspiracy to commit a federal offense. If, however, the offense, the commission of which is the object of the conspiracy, is a misdemeanor only, the punishment for such conspiracy shall not exceed the maximum punishment. It doesn't matter. The first clause, 5 years or both. That's felony right there. Okay? Now, very important, for the entire duration of the indictment, which we will get to. See, right there. There's the indictment. We will get to it. Keep in mind, probable cause. They have to have probable cause to believe a crime has been committed. They have to believe that he believed he had a duty to file tax returns. He had a duty to report as profit the amounts that they say he did not report as profit. There's a whole lot of things they have to go through to say, we have probable cause to go to a grand jury. Or they have to lie. Oh, yeah. Probable cause. How much of the case against the defendants is based on an allegation of an attempt to defraud the government of tax revenue? Has willfulness been presumed? Criminal intent, etc. A lack of criminal intent equates to innocence, and probable cause of guilt is requisite to the indictment or arrest. They can't go to a grand jury and say, we have probable cause, we need you to sign this, unless they have probable cause. Probable cause means we believe you're guilty, and we got a good reason to believe it. Guilty has to include criminal intent. Did they investigate criminal intent? This is key. How much of the evidence that the DOJ cites or possesses? We have emails from this guy. We got a communication from the bank over here, in this country, these different organizations that he set up, these different companies he set up, where he was hiding money. How much of the evidence they obtained, and they cite it in the indictment, how much of it was obtained citing as probable cause the commission of tax crimes or the failure to report for income tax purposes the money that they discovered? How much of the evidence the government cites or possesses is the fruit of a poisonous tree, seized based on a warrant citing only tax crimes that cannot exist? If the charge of conspiracy to defraud the U.S. is based on wrong interpretation of the law that otherwise does not impose a duty, and if the evidence was obtained under that warrant and should therefore be suppressed, how strong is the case against Manafort and friend? As an advocate, for anybody who's in this situation and says, what do you think of this indictment? This is where I go. Plenty of other, there's a few different approaches. This is what I look for first because of what I can prove using just the tax code. I'm going to try to erode their case. His attorney came out and said, this is so bogus, this, that, and the other thing. People do this all the time. They use offshore entities. Of course they do. They park their money in them. Good point. And the attorney was very aggressive in favor of Manafort and saying that the indictment is really bogus. There's nothing really in it. And upon my first review, I disagree halfway. There's a couple things that seem just really hard to, and of course it's the facts. Now, what if that attorney says, okay, we got no probable cause over here, or a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't know about criminal procedure. The warrant's defective. A four-corner analysis of the indictment shows that the indictment's defective. Whatever. Okay, there's a lot of reasons that attorney may have said, I'm going to blow this out of the water. But for my purposes and for the purposes of what I think is important for your perspective, from your perspective, meaning I think I'm talking to somebody that might not even have read an indictment before. That could be the case. Somebody else who maybe wants to say, well, what does Dave have to say about an indictment that just came out, about a very public figure? As a matter of fact, a campaign manager for the President of the United States. So you might be maybe an advocate yourself, or maybe an aficionado. You want to know more, and here's a side lesson you can take in. Okay, let's listen to somebody else look at an indictment. What does Dave have to say about it? Well, that's how I would attack this case. It's the things that stand out mostly to me as a way to approach this indictment, but it doesn't solve the whole thing. Like I said, there's a couple things, what were you thinking when you did that? They have nothing to do with taxes. As you'll see, conspiracy to defraud the United States. Hey, he owes taxes on this money. He didn't report it on his tax returns, and he's got a bunch of offshore companies to hide it. Can you believe it? Grand jury foreperson, can you believe it? Your Honor, we ought to hold him in prison pending trial. Oh, home confinement? Okay, he'd better wear an ankle bracelet. And right now they're hearing a motion on whether or not he should be allowed to shed the ankle bracelet on home detention. Conspiracy to commit an offense against the United States. Right here, principles, this is important. Whoever commits an offense, aids or abets, blah, blah, blah. Whoever willfully causes an act to be done, which if directly performed by him or another would be an offense against the United States. He's punishable as a principle. It might increase your sentence, but you see that this statute doesn't carry a separate criminal prison sentence. Okay? Whoever commits an offense against the U.S. or aids, abets, or counsels, commands, or induces, or procures its commission, it has to be an offense. How do you know that, Dave? Well, we got the Supreme Court in 1962 in Shuttleworth versus City of Birmingham. This is the U.S. Supreme Court citing several state cases, state Supreme Court cases. It is generally recognized that there can be no conviction for aiding and abetting someone to do an innocent act. They have to criminalize the act that you put in, or that you sought to cause with your conduct. And they put taxes at the end of that when they know and you know no one can prove you even owe it, but the judge is on our side. And so they just put that at the end. It's not an innocent act, Your Honor. He owed taxes. And they get around this concept. Okay. Conspiracy to defraud. Civil forfeiture. And we know what this is. Pardon me. This is, you were engaged in a wrongful act. You committed an offense. The following property is subject to forfeiture. We're going to take any property, real or personal, involved in a transaction or attempted transaction in violation of 1956. And as you see here, it's one of the charges, 1956. Conspiracy to launder money. It's conspiracy to engage in a pattern of misconduct. And so here is, and it's not a laughing matter. I'm just saying any property, it's everything, pal. Okay? Oh, you trigger the law and they release the dogs and take everything. You're done. You get a public defender. If you're 99% of Americans, Paul Manafort, people will step in, he will have counsel. But look at what they're allowed to do. Any property which constitutes or is derived from proceeds traceable. Any property which this and that. Piles of belly button lint. Your toenail clippings. Any property. And so it is a feeding frenzy once the law is triggered under certain statutes. Any questions? Citizen breath? So right now, the entire, every penny Manafort ever dreamed of possessing right now is being seized by the federal government, and the people rightfully in possession of it will have to go to court and say, what are you doing? We rendered services, or we gave him a product, and they'll have to defend it because the government has no integrity. Isn't that a simple equation? This is how much we can... Look at how long this law... Authority to suspend. Okay, look at how long this statute is. Find an exception to what they can seize. Good luck. Your toenail clippings. Oh, you disposed of them? Who's your garbage collector? What's his name? It's not funny. It's ridiculous. That's why I'm laughing. It's the government I'm laughing at. It's not the situation. This is terrible. This is the game plan. 982. Criminal forfeiture. The court, in imposing a sentence on a person convicted of an offense in violation of 1956, which we'll get to, shall order... They don't have a choice. Shall order that the person forfeit to the United States any property. Bend over. Any questions? Okay. Same type of statute. Everything, pal. Shall order an inspection of things we can't talk about because it's somebody else's radio show or whatever. You get the picture. They're up his. False statements. Except as otherwise provided in the section, whoever in any manner within the jurisdiction of the executive, legislature, just call it the United States. All three branches, there's not another one, of the United States, knowingly and willfully falsifies, conceals, or covers up by any trick, scheme, or device a material fact. Trick. I've never seen that. Okay? I've only seen that in this statute. Trick. I don't know. Makes any material false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or representation makes or uses any false writing or document knowing the same to contain any materially false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or entry, shall be fined under this title, 5 years, felony. Now we have 1956. This is the subsection that they allege in the indictment, and I'm going back to, you'll see on the first page of the indictment, 1956H. Sometimes they'll leave the subsection off when they cite the statute and make you dig for the particular subclause of the statute, in this case, subclause H or subparagraph H. But then they know that if you have any respectable, really, attorney, they'll have to answer a bill of particulars later saying, what subsection are you alleging here? Okay? You throw us into the middle of the statute, spare me. Which one are you talking about? So they've cited this in the caption of the indictment. H. Any person who conspires to commit any offense defined in this section or 1957, we can ignore that, shall be subject to the same penalties as those prescribed for the offense the commission of which was the object of the conspiracy. You bet. So if you conspire, same penalty as if you had committed it. Okay? And so we go. This is a laundering of monetary instruments, section 1956. Whoever, A. Okay? Laundering instruments. Any person who conspires. And then we go to the sentences authorized. This is how you're sentenced. You can pause it right here if you want to read that statute. Okay? 612. Registration statement required. And if you don't, there's criminal sanctions. No person shall act as an agent of a foreign principal unless he has filed with the Attorney General a true and complete registration statement and supplements thereto as required by subsections A and B of the section, or unless he is exempt from registration under the provisions of this subchapter. You better register. Here's a law that requires it. You see, that's section 612. Now we're going to go to section 618 to see what happens if you don't do this. And this is under Title 22. Enforcement and penalties, violations, false statements, and willful omissions. Any person who willfully, that means you have to have criminal intent. Well, it hasn't been enforced more than 6 times in the last how many decades? Okay, and this is where that criminal intent argument will rub against it, I predict, because he's going to have fantastic attorneys, believe that, and they're not going to leave any stone unturned, and that's a real refreshed argument since the 2015 decision, June 1st, in the Supreme Court, Elonis versus the United States. Any person who willfully violates any provision of this chapter or regulation in any registration statement or supplement thereto or document filed with the Attorney General, blah, 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 makes a false statement. Don't do that. 5 years imprisonment, or not more than 6 months. Sounds like a misdemeanor. So you better report. Now, there's been talk, of course, about what kind of plea agreement might be reached. It depends on what the goals of the prosecutor are. They're after Trump. We'll let you plead guilty to this misdemeanor charge of making a false statement. And you'll pay a restitution, blah, 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 whatever comes into it. If you disclose A, B, and C about Donald Trump and you're willing to paint it in such and such a light, there'll be a backroom deal struck about how can we get to the president by having needled this guy and clubbed him like a baby seal into a plea agreement. Mode of recovery. Whether a civil fine, this is where the government kicks your ass. If a person is charged in a criminal case with a violation of the Act of Congress, or for which, whatever, the government may include a notice of forfeiture, we're going to coming after everything you've ever thought of owning. Okay, criminal forfeiture. You better register as a foreign agent. Let's see. Records and reports of foreign financial agency transactions. A person shall be required to disclose and record. A person shall be required to disclose a record required to be kept under this section or under a regulation under this section only as required by law. Thank you. You don't have to disclose anything that's not required by law. Big deal. That shocked me when I saw, oh, thanks, we have to remind them. You better not go beyond the law when you ream these people out of their personal information. Back to the top, man. The Secretary of the Treasury shall require a resident or citizen of the U.S. or a person in or doing business in the U.S. to keep records, file reports, or keep records and file reports. When the resident, citizen, or person makes a transaction or maintains a relation for any person with a foreign financial agency. We're off the path, or off the topic of taxes entirely with this. Okay, and as I told you at the beginning, that's my key focus. Maybe the evidence obtained was not based on an allegation that this law had been violated. Maybe it was an allegation of tax law violations. In such an instance, I could quickly erode probable cause. And 5322, we're going from 5314 to 5322 for penalties. A person willfully violating this chapter, did they ever investigate whether or not he intended? Okay. It's always part of the... I'd like to see the grand jury transcripts, please, to see if his intent was misrepresented to the grand jury, because it is an essential element, and if they represented him as guilty when they knew or didn't even investigate whether or not he knew he had a duty, what business do you have going to a grand jury? A person willfully violating a regulation prescribed under Section 21. I'd like to know how many pages those regulations are. Oh, approximately 7,000. I have no idea. How can you tell when you're in violation of those regulations without a team of attorneys that have been in the industry and that particular field of law for 20 years? While violating another law of the United States or as part of a pattern of any illegal activity involving more than $100 in a 12-month period, shall be fined not more than $500,000 in 10 years. Okay. Watch for proof of this. $100,000 or more in a 12-month period. You'll see a lot. It has to be illegal activity. How are you going to prove that? Illegal activity? It has to be illegal because he didn't register as a foreign agent, because it's not illegal if all he did was sell his personal services for compensation. Is the government in compliance with or in violation of Tax Code Section 83A when they say he failed to pay taxes and he was conspiring to defraud the United States out of money owed on that compensation? How much of the government's case goes away if I'm right about Tax Code Section 83? Take my tutorials. I'm not going to recap the information here again for you. It's free right here on the YouTube channel, okay? And so anything regarding taxes, illegal activity. Is it illegal activity because he failed to register as a foreign agent or an agent for a foreign whatever? Okay. But if it's illegal activity and all that evidence was obtained because they said it was tax fraud, they have to jump through Section 83 because, drum roll please, the indictment. The first paragraph drags the government by the earlobe right into Section 83. They start the indictment. They make a it's their, what do you call it? Their beachhead. It's their introduction to the case. Look at this. Millions of dollars he didn't pay taxes on. Okay. What kind of money was it? Was it capital gains? Well, okay, then Section 83 wouldn't apply. Was it a kickback from an illegal transfer of uranium to the Russian government? No, that Section 83 wouldn't apply, would it? It has to be compensation for services. All of the money, where did it come from? Compensation for services. Watch this. Not all the money. There's a transaction with a bank that we'll get to in this indictment. It's obviously not compensation for services, and it's ill form at the very least. You don't do something like that with a bank when you apply for a loan, please. and he did. And so I'm trying to find Nirvana here with the page width. Okay. Defendants Paul Manafort and Gates served for years as political consultants and lobbyists. They were selling their personal services for compensation to an unrelated party in arm's length transactions. Stop. Did you hear that? They were selling their personal services for compensation to an unrelated party in arm's length transactions. That means they were selling their personal services for the value of their services. Section 83A governs. Watch. Acted as an unregistered agent, don't do that. There's a law that says you have to register. Okay, so they're covering bases, they're introducing you to the case. I hope you appreciate a slow view of what the government's doing. Okay, I just read to you the different statutes, which you won't hear on the TV, and they got advertisements they have to fit in. They only got so long in 1 hour, like 41 minutes per hour of broadcast, whatever. So time is at a premium. They can't do this for you, and there's precious few, if anybody else, really willing to hold your hand through a document like this. Okay, so I want to introduce you to my case. You're the grand jury, and I give you this document, and I present the evidence. I want you to sign this for me, please. So we can wrap it up. My client has a case. The United States has been offended. We have laws, nation of laws. This guy knew what he was doing was bad. And so they go to a grand jury and say this. They served for years as political consultants and lobbyists. Between 2006 and 2015, they acted as unregistered agents for the government of Ukraine, the Party of Regions, a Ukrainian political party whose leader, Viktor Yanukovych, was president from 2010 to 2014, and the opposition bloc, a successor party to the Regions that formed in 2014 when Yanukovych fled to Russia. Manafort and Gates generated tens of millions of dollars in income. Stop right there. And it was as a result of their Ukraine work. Right here. First things first. They just told the grand jury Manafort's Manafort and Gates generated tens of millions of dollars in profit, in gross income. Profit. Okay? Profit. Section 83 says only the excess over the amount paid is gross income. And the government just said tens of millions of dollars in compensation are profit. It is profit when Section 83 says it is. The object, thus far, is tens of millions of dollars in compensation for services that the government calls profit as a result of their Ukraine work. In order to hide Ukraine payments from the United States authorities, who wouldn't hide these payments? You went to the Swiss government and threatened them, so their banks turned over the personal identity of 5,000 Swiss bank account holders. Was this in 2005? Yeah? And so, who wouldn't hide their stuff from the government? Right or wrong? Isn't it true that the United States government hosed down entire regions inside Iraq with depleted uranium ammunition that is causing an entire generation of Iraqi babies from those regions to die in the womb or be born with the most horrific scars and conditions? When in fact the government knew for decades the effects of radiation on humans and fetuses. And you don't hide your stuff from that government? Like Commander Spock on Star Trek never said, "Are you stupid or something?" In order to hide these payments from approximately 2006 to 2016, Manafort and Gates laundered the money through scores of United States and foreign corporations, partnerships, and bank accounts. You only launder money. I'm not even through the first paragraph yet. You only launder money if it's the proceeds of illegal conduct. The word laundered only applies to the proceeds of illegal schemes and conduct. They laundered the money. You have to prove they owed a tax on it. We aren't even out of the first paragraph. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars in income. And in order to hide it, they set up a bunch of companies. They laundered the money to hide it. Get to the part where it's illegal to put it where they put it. This is just an element of a scheme they have to prove, which is conspiracy to defraud. They have to prove that before they can use the term laundered. But it doesn't matter in America. They'll get the indictment and they club you like a baby seal to get the plea agreement. Roll on the president. Say this, say that about the president. We'll let you plead to a misdemeanor. Those are the wheels that turn. Okay? Manafort and Gates laundered the money through scores of United States and foreign corporations, partnerships, and bank accounts, as we'll see, okay, as we go through this. And there's plenty of this that will happen very quickly. Okay, I'm not going to read every word of this indictment, so don't pass out on me. In furtherance of the scheme, what scheme? The scheme to defraud the United States. Oh, if no money was owed to the United States, there is no scheme. Again, my base question, how much can I do to their case? I'm an advocate, remember? My job is to find out how much I can do to their case. And so on first viewing, my first impression of the indictment, on a four corners analysis without further research into banking and the rest of the stuff that I'm simply not going to get into. But the taxes, we see here, in furtherance of the scheme. What scheme? That means they already laid out a scheme. Well, this is only paragraph 2. What scheme? It has to be the scheme that's in paragraph 1. Conspiracy to not pay taxes. So if no taxes are imposed on compensation for services, how much of a case do these people have against Paul Manafort? And I apologize to Wesley Allen Dodd for equating these people, or these organisms, with actual humans. And you can Google it, Wesley Allen Dodd. So, in furtherance of the scheme of tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud, they didn't side him with tax evasion. Mark Levin pointed this out. He says, it's about tax evasion, but they don't allege tax evasion. They don't charge him with that. They say conspiracy to defraud. Well, look at the work I just did on that. Yeah, Mark Levin is correct. Not for the reasons I cite. And he's only partly correct. All he's doing is pointing out how come they just said conspiracy to defraud and they did not allege tax evasion. And that's a good question, but we already got to the bottom of it, and we're going to carry it through the indictment. How much of this is based, and how much of the evidence that they're using was based on an allegation that he owed an income tax on the fair market value of his services. That's at the foundation of this indictment, except for the failure to register as a foreign agent. That's kind of tough to get around. Paragraph number 2. In furtherance of the scheme, they funneled millions of dollars. Funneled? You mean placed on account. Oh, they funneled it. All these buzzwords for, you got assault weapon and automatic and all the other. They want to surround the conduct with buzz phrases that makes the judges. We don't have to go there. And Gates funneled millions of dollars of payments into foreign nominee accounts and companies, opened them and their accomplices in nominee names. Their accomplices only if there's a scheme, if it's illegal. In these different places, Cyprus, St. Vincent, Seychelles, Manafort and Gates hid the existence of the foreign companies and bank accounts, falsely and repeatedly reporting to their tax preparers and to the United States that they had no foreign bank accounts. That's different. They have a law they cite that requires you disclose the existence of foreign bank accounts. I can't help you. Paragraph 3. In furtherance of the scheme. Paragraph 4. In furtherance of the scheme. Paragraph 5. Okay, good. Okay. Now, I say this. In furtherance of the scheme, meaning they already told you what the scheme is. The scheme is he made income and he didn't tell you about it. And here the scheme is they didn't report foreign bank accounts. See how that's kind of outside the purview of what I teach? It's inside the tax code. If you're required to report foreign bank accounts, if you're planning on failing to do so, you better have a letter signed by your accountant and or an attorney that says you can fail to report this bank account because you have Boyle Brothers versus U.S. or U.S. versus Boyle Brothers if you rely on the opinion of an expert non-culpabilis. So paragraph 3. In furtherance of the scheme, they concealed from the United States their work as agents of and millions of dollars in payments from the Ukraine and its political parties. Among other things, directed a campaign to lobby the U.S. officials on behalf of the government of Ukraine. Lobbying work, okay. Instead, when the Department of Justice sent inquiries to Manafort and Gates in 2016 about their activities, they responded with a series of false and misleading statements. I can't help you. Unless they're calling some of the statements about the compensation for services false. I can help you there maybe if they're saying this is false and you owed taxes. But you see how it strays from the original scheme. There's a couple of allegations that reach out into these other statutes that we reviewed. Paragraph 4, just page 2 of the indictment. In furtherance of the scheme, they used hidden overseas wealth to enjoy a lavish lifestyle without paying taxes on the income that we can't even prove they owed. Can you believe that? Manafort, without reporting the income to his tax preparer because it wasn't income at all, spent millions of dollars on luxury goods and services for himself that he slaved for the Ukrainian government. Do you have a charge out there by the Ukrainian government that Manafort defrauded them out of money? Or did he perform a whole bunch of lobbying services? Get to the part where the Ukrainian government says, we aren't pleased at all, the guy didn't do any work for us. Otherwise, it's all built on, he lived a lavish lifestyle. The guy was making major money, as you'll see. And the indictment's built on, he made compensation for his services. More power to you, friend. Don't lie on reports. Don't falsify reports. And if there's a law that says you have to report offshore accounts, report them. But the other stuff, the government's built a house of cards, half of it. Okay? The other part might stand. Manafort, we're going to get dicey here on conduct. Manafort also used these offshore accounts to purchase multi-million-dollar properties in the United States. Manafort then borrowed millions of dollars in loans using these properties as collateral, thereby obtaining cash in the United States without reporting and paying taxes on the income. A loan is not gross income. Google it. And they're saying this is the money laundering scheme. He made the money, he didn't pay taxes on it. Then he bought real estate and took out loans on it. And that put the money in his pocket inside the United States. The scheme to defraud is complete. It's come to fruition. In order to increase the amount of money he could access in the United States, Manafort defrauded the institutions that loaned money on these properties so that they would lend him more money at more favorable rates than he would otherwise be able to obtain. Don't do that. Don't lie to a bank to get a loan. I can't help you. Paragraph 5, Gates and Manafort, in obtaining money from these offshore accounts, which he was instrumental in opening, period. Let's go back and read that. Gates aided Manafort. Gates aided Manafort in obtaining money from these accounts. Gates used money from these offshore accounts to pay for his personal expenses, including his mortgage, children's tuition, and interior decorating of his Virginia residence. In total, more than $75 million flowed through offshore accounts. You can see why the government's angry. Manafort laundered more than $18 million, which was used by him to buy property, goods, and services in the United States, income that he concealed from the United States Treasury, the Department of Justice, and others. Gates transferred more than $3 million from the offshore accounts to other accounts that he controlled. Did they owe any taxes on any of that money? If your answer is yes, how did Section 83 operate in your conclusion that any of their compensation was gross income? You don't have the luxury of a choice. 83A explains how to tax all of the money they brought in. You've heard no allegations that any of it was in any form other than compensation for services until he took out a loan. And to reduce the rates on the loan, he told a lie about where the money was going to go. As we'll see, he said, hey, I got this condo worth almost $3 million. Give me a loan. I'm going to spend a bunch of money on construction, and so it'll be worth $5 million, whatever. And so loan me based on the amount it'll be worth after I do the improvements. Okay. And he got the loan. And they dug up an email that says, after I get this loan, watch this. I'll spend a bunch of it to buy this to pay off this other mortgage. And he wasn't going to spend it on construction. Oops. But was that email seized on the probable cause that a tax crime had been committed? It haunts this entire indictment. What if the evidence of other crimes, except the false reporting, it's hard to say, no, that statement wasn't false and it's on a government form under penalties of perjury. I don't know where the evidence will take him on that one. It might work really disfavorably. Let's put it that way. You don't know. But when you detect the branch in the road, the fork in the road, you have to examine both of them. So anyway, the false statements, yeah, it might be easily proved. But this other stuff, if you can attack the evidence based on probable cause for a tax crime, how much of their case remains. Now, relevant individuals and entities. This is the part of the indictment we can just skip right through. They set up this partnership, that LLC, this partnership, this company over here in that country, these companies over here in that country. So there's going to be a bunch of stuff that we can just, for our purposes, we don't need to know all this. But for the purposes of going to the grand jury, yeah, we need to prove that they were heavy into laundering all this money. And they're working for a pro-Russia political party in Ukraine. So we're still talking about the same cash flow, compensation for services. Okay, that's all we're talking about. Until they got loans in the United States and until they failed to file forms to register as agents for a foreign government. That's all. Okay? So at a certain point, I can't help you. But anything based on those taxes, you stick Section 83 right into the government's wheelhouse, and you stay there with it. And I'm scrolling through this slowly so you can see that, this is, look at all these entities they set up. Well, okay, so what? Get to the part where they owed a tax. When you say they owed a tax on their compensation, is the government in compliance with or in violation of Tax Code Section 83? We can't. And they fall on their asses. It explains how to tax me. No, it doesn't. Well, according to and all the rest of the good stuff you saw in the Section 83 tutorial here on the YouTube channel. It's free. I'm not going to go over it again. My earliest videos are a requisite for everything that came after. First thing I did was I put a law library on record right here on YouTube. You go through those videos first. Now, the Internal Revenue Service was a bureau. That means was, not because it is no longer, but because it was during the times complained of. Complained of, yeah, through 2014 in this indictment. Was a bureau in the United States Department of the Treasury responsible for administering the tax laws of the United States and collecting taxes owed to the Treasury. True. 26 CFR 601.101A says precisely this. The scheme between in or around these years, both dates, now 2017 and conspiracy to defraud the United States. The reason they allege conspiracy to defraud the United States in many instances is because of a statute of limitations. If the scheme persists to this day, the last act in the scheme to conceal, defraud, that starts the statute of limitations, tolling. So if a felony, which carries like a 5-year statute of limitations, if a felony was committed and it's been 6 years since the guy skipped out on these taxes. It's 2017. Let's say 2009, he skipped out on taxes. He's concealing his assets, whatever, blah, blah, blah. If you don't allege conspiracy to defraud the United States, you're past the 5-year statute of limitations on another felony that you might want to allege if you're one of these deviant prosecutors, like maybe, let's see, I want to think of a nice simple one, and it escapes me. My head is full of felonies. If they wanted to allege a certain, let's see, he hid money, conspiracy to defraud the United States. He owed the United States money because of tax law, taxes he owed, and he set up this account, but that was 7 years ago. Statute of limitations is over. And so they have to look for an act in furtherance of the conspiracy to bring it into the 5-year statute of limitations. 3.5 years ago, Your Honor, he deposited money into the account. That is the start of the tolling of the statute of limitations. The allegation that there's a conspiracy to defraud is one that allows them to point to the latest act in the conspiracy to bring you within the statute of limitations. Okay, the scheme. Both dates devised and intended to devise and executed and attempted to execute a scheme to artifice to defraud and to obtain money and property by means of false and fraudulent pretenses. Both of them, Manafort and Gates. False and fraudulent pretenses, representations, and promises from the United States, banks, and other financial institutions. As part of the scheme, Manafort and Gates repeatedly provided false information to financial bookkeepers, tax accountants, and legal counsel, among others. Their false statements. Was it false if this was one of the false statements that they're alleging? Was it false if Manafort and Gates said, hey, my tax return preparer, my accountant, this is how much money I made, and they didn't include all this compensation? Or this is how much profit I made, how much gross income I had? Was it false for them to tell their accountant such? You have to go slowly. One of the rules from which I've gleaned the single most benefit in all of my experience. Go slowly. When you run at the prosecutor's speed, your rights run right out the door. You go slowly with everything. And you see how I've kept that foundation from page 1 of the indictment through the rest of this. You have to temper everything with what the law says. Manafort and Gates wiring money from offshore accounts into the United States. Oh no, they're bringing money they earned legitimately overseas into the United States. How dare they? It's amazing. So they caused the following wire transactions to the tune of $12 million. We don't need to itemize them here. Cyprus. Whole lot of actions in Cyprus. Why would anybody do this much in Cyprus if there weren't tax benefits? Tax benefits. Vendor A, vendor B. Okay? Vendor C. Compensation for services. There's no allegations that they made money any other way, is there? Until they got loans in the United States against real estate. This is all compensation for services. Now, American, let's stop here. Just for a second. This is compensation for services. The guy is making major money. He did this by being a rapper. Can you hear how stupid that sounds? He made this by knowing what the hell to do. He's in business. Teach your children. Help them select their role models. I'm not saying Paul Manafort's a god. I'm saying look at the kind of money this guy was bringing in. And the worst the government can say about him is that he owed taxes on it. Meaning, this guy in a legitimate business made this kind of money. You get into business. Okay? Educated people. Those are role models. Hiding of Ukraine lobbying and public relations work. Well, if you're required to disclose it and you hide it, I got no argument for you. Okay? I can't help you. And so this is off my track also. You can read all of this at your leisure. You can get this document online. It's in a bunch of places. As part of the scheme. What scheme? Multi-million-dollar lobbying campaign in the United States. A scheme to lobby. A scheme to lobby. A scheme to lobby without disclosing. A person required to make such a filing must further make in all lobbying material a conspicuous statement that the materials are distributed on behalf of the foreign principal. Okay, he didn't do this. You got me. It's a misdemeanor, I believe, as we go, okay? But this is all the allege right here. So get to the part where he owes money on all of that compensation for services. Can you see how small the government's case is? Until they ignore Section 83. Okay? And all of this is inconsequential. You can pause the video anytime you want. You can go get this document anywhere online. I just wanted to point out to you this is the making of sausage as it relates to an indictment. They trumped up a lot of stuff. And so you have to be aware of this as an advocate. And if you're a beginner, you know, if you've never even looked at an indictment before, go download a few. They're everywhere on the web. If you just Google the term indictment, you'll find PDFs everywhere, okay? And it's even if they were scheming to conceal these assets because they thought they owed a tax, law comes first. You have to prove I owed a tax to begin with, or you have no case. Man. Okay, let's read this comment. They're pointing out several comments that, oh, look what he said over here. Can you describe the lobbying work specifically undertaken by the company on behalf of the Party of Regions, the political party in the Ukraine? Answer, this is a question better asked to Company B or the Center, as the agreement was between the parties. Our firm did not play a role in the structure, nor were we registered lobbyists. Okay. Good point. Thank you. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm scrolling. Get the indictment. I've put your feet on the ground regarding the document, okay? How I would look at it. There's what's called a four corners analysis. Do they allege an offense? Yeah, they do. They do a real good job of it. So, four corners, yeah, the indictment's valid. But the tax charges pull the rug out from underneath. The 371 charge we'll look at, conspiracy to defraud. And if the evidence was obtained under a warrant based on allegations of tax crimes for just compensation for services, that evidence must be suppressed. Okay? And this is what you do when you move slowly, observing all of your rights until the law, due process, makes them evaporate. Okay? Like rights to a speedy trial. Well, they evaporate when your counsel files a motion that the court has to consider. Those are called excludable days. They don't count toward the 90 days speedy trial rights. Okay? So, anyway, hiding of foreign bank accounts and false filings. They're saying, oh, that's an element of the crime. Or it's an element of the scheme. They're hiding things. Who wouldn't hide from you? And we've been over that just with one point about the whole uranium ammunition thing. Who wouldn't hide from this government? You have to be kidding me. Oh, man. 29, wheels meet the road here. Second, United States citizens are also obliged to report information to the IRS regarding foreign bank accounts. You didn't report your... First, the Bank Secrecy Act and its implementing regulations require citizens to report to the Treasury any financial interest in or signatory authority over fiduciary control, any bank account or other financial account held in foreign countries for every calendar year in which the aggregate balance of such foreign accounts exceeds $10,000 at any time during the year. Okay? So this is where they have him, and now they allege false reporting. Some of the false reporting is it that you didn't. Let's see. Furthermore, each of Manafort's tax filings, 2008 through 14, represented falsely that he did not have authority over any foreign bank accounts. I can't help you. So, plenty of this, you know, it might be really easy to prove. A fraud to increase access to offshore money. Don't do that. After Manafort used his offshore accounts to purchase real estate in the U.S., he took out mortgages on the properties, thereby allowing Manafort to have the benefits of liquid income without paying taxes on it. Well, don't tell lies to get your mortgages. First things first. But otherwise, that would not be illegal if he didn't owe money or owe taxes on the money, right? Further, Manafort defrauded the banks that loaned him the money so that he could withdraw more money at a cheaper rate than he otherwise would have been permitted. In 2012, Manafort, through a corporate vehicle called MC Soho Holdings, LLC, owned by him, bought a condo. He paid approximately $3 million. All the money used to purchase the condo came from Manafort entities in Cyprus. Manafort used the property from at least 2015 through 16 as an income-generating property. In his tax returns, Manafort took advantage of the beneficial tax consequences of owning this property. He rented it out as an Airbnb. Listen. Okay. this is the bank fraud element. I don't know why they didn't allege bank fraud. It's easy to presume, and Mark Levin may very well be right here. This is an attempt to get to Trump. So they're not going to hit him with the 30-year felony sentence, 18 U.S.C. 1343, fraud by wire, radio, or television. There's probably another bank fraud statute. It's 30 years if it affects a financial transaction. And no question, he used international banking, that's wire fraud, to commit or to help commit this fraud against the bank. But they didn't charge him with it. They're not after him, or they would have. He applied for a mortgage on the condominium. Because the bank would permit a greater loan amount if the property were owner-occupied, Manafort lied to the bank and said that his daughter and son-in-law occupied the property and that it wasn't a rental. Oh, I can't help you. For instance, he wrote to his son-in-law to advise, that has to be like an email, wouldn't it? To advise him that when the bank appraiser came to assess the condominium, his son-in-law should, quote, remember, he believes that you and Manafort's daughter are living there. Oh, okay. Based on a request from Manafort, Gates caused a document to be created which listed the property as the second home of Manafort's daughter and son-in-law when Gates knew this fact to be false. As a result of his false representations, the bank provided a loan for approximately $3.185 million. I can't help you. In 2015, he sought to borrow cash against the property. For a loan provided greater amounts, it required loan amounts that could be paid solely from the construction of the property and thus increase the value of the property. Okay, but later on, however, Manafort never intended to limit use of the proceeds to construction as required by the loan contract. That's called bank fraud. In December 2015, before the loan was made, Manafort wrote his tax preparer, among others, that the construction loan will allow me to pay back the other apartment mortgage in full. Further, when the construction loan closed, Manafort used hundreds of thousands of dollars from the construction loan to make a down payment on another property in California. Don't do that. I can't help you. That is stuff they can discover without alleging tax crimes and raiding his home for all the property he's got and all the records. Okay? They could prove that without all that, I'll bet you. Now, count one, conspiracy against the United States. And now, okay, we're really getting down to it. Look at that. That's only a paragraph and a half. 2. Paragraphs 1 through 30 are incorporated by this reference. You bet. So everything we just said, don't forget it. Grand jury foreperson or Your Honor, this is our case. How much of it is built on, he made compensation for services, and we can't prove there's a tax on that? How much of it is built on that? How much of the evidence they cite is evidence obtained under a warrant that's based on a misinterpretation of tax law? In or about 06 to 017, both dates being approximate, together with others, knowingly and intentionally conspired to defraud the United States by impeding, impairing, obstruction, and defeating lawful government functions. You sure? Let me see. To commit offenses against the United States, to wit, the violations of law charged in counts 3 through 6 and 10 through 12. Not 7 through 9. Okay? Conspiracy to launder money. Any person who conspires to commit any offense in violation of this section. Okay? Now, in or around these 2 years, together with others, did knowingly and intentionally conspire to transmit, and this is the money laundering, meaning I'm going to launder money this way. To launder, it has to be proceeds, it has to be ill-gotten gains. So, if they make an argument, 2 arguments. The law does not impose a tax on those amounts, number 1. And that's the big one. So I lied about it. So what else? There's no conspiracy to defraud because you were never owed a dime. You have to keep those first principles in mind. If he didn't owe a dime, there is no conspiracy to defraud. There is only false statements and failure to register. Very important. You not lose sight of that. That's the fabric of the government's case regarding everything but false statements and failure to register. So they can bring the money in however they want. They can hide it wherever they want. It's like this word collusion. They keep. That's the Democrats' word. Don't even use it. First, what's the crime? You have to identify the wrongful act. Now you ask, were there more than one persons involved? Yes. You mean there was collusion? The question of collusion, the term collusion, doesn't mean a thing until you identify an offending conduct. Collusion? You mean they both went to the store for a gallon of milk together? That's how meaningless the word collusion is unless you identify an offense first. Period. So he's transmit all these financial transactions, conduct, financial transactions. How do you do this in foreign commerce? He's laundering money. That's like I think it's a 20-year felony. And yet, did they owe taxes? You know, after they apply for a loan and they misrepresented the facts to get the loan, then they transferred money? Okay, sure. Money laundering. But it was before, okay, these are foreign accounts. They used all these foreign accounts from places in the United States and outside the United States with the intent to promote the carrying on of specified unlawful activities, felony violation of the requirement to report. You got me, okay? They tied it to that illegal activity rather than to taxes. But if they tried to tie it to taxes, and like I said, there's talk that this has only been prosecuted like 6 times in the last 20, 30 years, and only 2 of those was successful. So the argument can be made that I'm reasonable to believe that I'm not required to report, okay? But you get into the weeds. But they did tie an ongoing illegal mode of conduct to the transactions, acting as an agent of a foreign government. If they tied it strictly to a tax liability, there might be a challenge there. Okay? Now, principles. 18 U.S.C. Section 2. Whoever willfully causes an act to be done, you can be punishable just as if you had done the act yourself. That's what they mean when they cite Section 2. Now, records and reports. The Secretary of the Treasury shall require a resident or citizen of the U.S. To keep records, file reports, keep records and file reports when the resident, citizen, or person makes transaction or maintains a relation for any person with a foreign financial agency. Okay. And the penalty, a person willfully violating this subsection, or the subchapter, or a regulation. How long are those regulations? A million pages? 40 pounds? You can be penalized up to $100,000, or you're in jail. Okay? I'm sorry, $100,000. Give me a break. I hate protracted sentences. You know, I lived on them for years. Or willfully violating any regulation while violating another law of the United States or as part of a pattern of any illegal activity involving more than $100,000 in a 12-month period shall be fined not more than $500,000 and imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both. My mistake. Excuse me. You know, my hat's off to somebody that I do not bore. If you can suffer through this, you know, this parsing of language and details and stop and weigh the situation and all that, you know, more power to you. It's not everybody that can do that. You know, the eyes roll back in your head and you go, I can't take it. You know, legal briefs, it's hard to find somebody that can even proof them. So, counts 7 through 9. Remember, these were excluded from a certain parameter they outlined earlier. These are the ones about failure to report foreign bank and financial accounts. I can't help you. If the law says report them, they're going to come after you if you don't report them. Oh, you made a bunch of money? They will come after you with tanks and the rest of it. Unregistered agent of a foreign principal. As we read, no person shall act as a foreign agent unless you provide this report. And that's 612, and 618 says, if you don't report, $5,000, not more than 6 months. It's a misdemeanor. Did you report? I can't help you. Report false and misleading statements. Let's see. Defendants Manafort and Gates knowingly and willfully caused to be made false statements of a material fact and omitted a material fact necessary to make statements therein not misleading in a document filed and furnished to the Attorney General on the provisions of FARA, Foreign Accounts Registration Act. Report your foreign bank accounts. Okay. Count 12, false statements. These two. Knowingly and willfully did cause another to falsify, conceal, or cover up by scheme. Let's see. To wit, the statements in the November 23rd, 2016 and February 10th, 2017 submissions to the Department of Justice quoted in paragraph 49. Really? Yeah, these right here. Paragraph 49. So they violated 2 laws with that conduct. Count 12, false statements. Except as otherwise provided in this section, whoever, in any matter within the jurisdiction of the executive, all 3 branches, falsifies, conceals, or covers up by any trick, scheme, whatever. And these two, right here, Manafort and Gates, knowingly and willfully did cause another to falsify, conceal, and cover up by a scheme and device a material fact. Okay. Section 1001. As a principle. Now the forfeiture allegation. Bend over, we want everything. That's what that means. Under the law, we can take any property. Substitute assets, you bet. Any property. Period. Any. So now we have the Manafort indictment. Not painlessly reviewed, but if I were to review this document for you, one of the dynamics, one of the traits, one of my work ethics you're paying me to exercise is caution and sloth. You move slowly. You move very slowly at every turn. And you heard me as I went through this entire document saying the original concepts, the original parameters you have to honor, but at certain points, it's not my purview. When an attorney gets into this and picks apart the evidence or picks apart the probable cause, was it based on tax crimes that don't exist? Did they think they had to pay an income tax on their compensation? If it's me, the answer, of course, is no, but there's a lot of things they have to weigh, and a good attorney will jump into this and see what they're able to do for their client from these aspects and from many others. And the attorney, as I said, for Paul Manafort came right out and said, I'm going to wipe myself with this one, and we'll see what kind of job he does, but understand it's not about Manafort. It's about getting an inside track into the Trump campaign. Manafort was there for, I don't know, was he there for like several months? And that's what they're after. So anyway, the Paul Manafort indictment. I hope you've enjoyed this nice, slow, layperson's look at the law versus the citizen, where the wheels meet the road. The rub between you and the government, and I hope you appreciate that there are certain things you really have to look out for, and I didn't run through this saying how much money does the client have. It's about, is the government doing its job, and that's really what I'm in this for. So again, my name is David Merlin. None of this is legal advice, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thank you now.